the background to the session tonight is obviously coming with the combined code and the comments coming through for that. We've had in the last few weeks all of the UK employees and pensioners of our big companies wondering what on earth is going on in terms of the governance framework here and elsewhere, but particularly here. We have against a background of the CEOs and the tenure of the CEOs has halved in the last 7 years, from say 8 years now to 4 years and a couple of months. So I think it's great credit to the nedonboard team for bringing together a task force to take people from the regulatory backgrounds, the non-exec backgrounds, finance, compliance, and fundamentally the whole human resources element to say, as we start to make boards responsible for looking at the sustainability of the businesses that they're in charge of, how is that going to feed through to policies for succession planning, how far down an organisation do they go, how transparent should they become within organisations, and the task force set out to say, well, here are the challenges in these areas, here is what we're seeing, and where we're seeing best practice, sharing that with you. So I have thoroughly enjoyed participating with David and with Chris and the others on the task force to debate some of these issues. And debates we have had, because there are no right answers, there are no prescriptive answers. We will follow on with a question and answer session where we would like to get your thoughts and feedback, but if you grab attention on the way through, then please don't hesitate. But I think it would be useful, David, to kick off with you and a little bit of background as to why we are where we are in terms of the combined code. Well, I mean, somebody once said to me, very experienced means old, and I think Jean-Pierre proved that earlier on tonight. But you and I were saying, I seem to remember when the Financial Services Act came in 1986 as one of the first things that was supposed to change the ground rules and make sure that we were behaving properly. You mentioned, as when we spoke earlier, the combined code came on the back of, we were having the Greenbury, which was before Cadbury, yes?
The Greenbury was after Cadbury.
Cadbury, yeah, Greenbury, it's like the seven dwarfs, which ones, how many could be in at any one time. So I think a little bit of a context of the sort of the background to it and why we are where we are today would be helpful.
Okay, very happy to do that. Code was 25 years old last year. If you start from Cadbury in 1992, Cadbury reported on the back of BCCI, Polypec, Maxwell, and the corporate failures at the time. And as I was saying earlier, my boss Paul George, who's Executive Director of Governance and Reporting at the FRC last week, was on the Today programme. And the questioning is along the lines. In fact, we grilled him the night before. We're doing our best John Humphrys impressions. The questions are on as well. The code's been around for 25 years. Polypec, BCCI, and here we are again. What's the point of the code? What purpose does it serve? And those are substantial and they're awkward questions. There are good answers in terms of the investment and the success, largely success, despite the small measure of the financial crisis of our capital markets over the years. The trust that there is, largely speaking, in governance, and it's an awkward thing to talk about because if I start from the position that standards of corporate governance in this country are high, which I believe they are, then clearly I'm open to being taken to task. So I'm complacent about it, which clearly we're not complacent about it. So part of the background to the code review that we're undertaking at the minute is the fact that there was a parliamentary select committee inquiry into corporate governance, particularly into remuneration and the workforce. There was a government green paper which arose from comments which Theresa May made before she was Prime Minister about workers on boards. And we sat there and thought, well, the code is often seen as a good policy tool to deliver to deliver these actions, and that's a good thing. But should we not, at this stage, step back and ask some basic questions about the code in terms of who is it for, what is it for, what is it attempting to achieve, is it successful? So we have asked those questions, and we've produced a revised code which is, we hope, shorter, not just for the sake of being shorter, but sharper and clearer. And clearly the composition of the board and the succession planning processes that you go through and the outcomes that you reach are an integral part of that code. And I'm sure we'll come on to those in a second. But that's largely, it's a very filleted version of how we are now having this fundamental review of the code.
And thank you, David. Chris, you were at the thick end of helping people come forward and putting people forward onto the board and so forth, and skill sets and succession planning, and your views on our task force were very interesting. Would you like to just a little bit of scene setting for where you're coming from?
With an HR background and then in executive search, my focus is inevitably on people, individuals involved in this activity, as opposed to any governance issues or legal issues or code issues. When I look at the code and its various forms, a lot of it is common sense, and all of it is good business. And so I tend to start from that point, what actually makes the most sense for a business that ought to coincide with the code. When it comes to the people issues, one of the things that we've been talking to a lot of companies about now is finding a way to look much more broadly for people than might have been the case in the past. There are extreme cases in some companies where, I suppose certainly going back to the 80s and 90s, where succession was a matter of who you knew, were you go to the same school, did you go to the same university, were you members of the same club. I think we have, to a large extent, moved away from that world, but there's still a lot of who you know, rather than challenging yourself as an organisation, challenging yourself as a board to actually go to people that you don't know. You may come in a size and shape that is unfamiliar, and then we start to get into the whole issue of diversity. So those are the things at the top of my mind.
Yeah, and in terms of how that feeds back into the work that David's doing in terms of the code and so forth, I mean, we talk about diversity, but there's, these are tools and schools are big words, there's lots of meanings for lots of people. So when it comes to that sort of thing, David, Chris, how do you, and the tenure of people on boards and this collective group think that we get, if it's the same people doing the same thing, audited by the same people, answering to the same standards, what are
I think you can challenge, if you implement some of the things that we're talking about in this code, there is a mechanism for routinely challenging the board, or for the board to routinely challenge themselves. So we're talking about board assessment, looking at the skills, looking at the behaviours in that board, the knowledge in that board, and routinely challenging, is it fit for purpose in terms of what the company is trying to do. Back to the sustainability issue, does this make it a sustainable company in a changing world? So I think if you start to address those issues routinely, then you ought to get increasing diversity, at least of thought. The challenge then comes in when the board doesn't look different. And then do you make an artificial intervention to make it look different, even though it may be thinking diversely? Is the diversity in that way?
And have you and David had that debate?
We have.
Whether that is exactly. So, but between the sort of, between the HR function communities and so forth, and the regulators, we keep getting these, do we put in place? Because what we're trying to get out here is what is best practice. What can we take out of this as a group of people trying to run business as well?
I think the heart of the argument when it comes to diversity is, do you force it? Now, I worked in the United States for a while at a time when quotas were being imposed, and there was an awful lot of whinging and whining about ethnic quotas and gender quotas, and the world was going to end. But by and large, in the US, certainly when it came to gender, it was effective. Although the boards of some companies now, I think there's been a bit of backsliding. But it was a very uncomfortable process and not entirely successful. Would it work here? That's the debate.
When Lord Davis started, I'm specifically referring to gender diversity now, but I'll move on to wider diversity. When Lord Davis started his work in 2010, I think it was, the figure for the FTSE 350 for women on boards was, I think, 11 or 12%. In the UK, we've gone down the route of aspirational targets, and we've now reached a figure of about 27-28%. So that's good progress. Whether it's sufficient progress, well, it's not sufficient progress. Now, and the other issue is that, of course, we have to consider the vital contribution of non-executive directors, and we have to consider executive directors as well. And much of the progress is with non-executive directors when it comes to gender, female representation on boards. So that's why the Hampton-Alexander review, which has taken on the mantle of the Lord Davis review, is looking at female representation for executive roles, and specifically the role of the nomination committees, and that's where the non-executives come in, obviously, to look at the pipeline for developing talent. And that's extremely important, and we've reflected that, I hope, sufficiently in the new code. Now, the other thing we've tried to do is not really provide a definition of diversity, but try and give a sort of an expansive review of what diversity is. And the trouble is that once, I realise can be a sensitive subject, once you start creating a list, the issue is, when does the list end? So there is a principle in the code which talks about diversity, and in addition to gender and race, we talk about cognitive and personal strengths. So what we're trying to bring to the fore there is expertise, knowledge, and experience, and so that you're considering the board in the round and in terms of the decisions that it has to take. So that's the way we're attempting to look at diversity in the new code.
And in terms of the succession planning, and where we're trying to taking the succession planning discussion together with the sustainability of the businesses and trying to push down below the board level and down through organisations and down into how HR in businesses is actually going to function as we move forward, given that we've got new cohorts of people coming through all the time with their own diversity, younger people with skill sets that many of the people management don't have, and so forth. How much guidance are people being given as to how far down an organisation people like non-execs are expected to have visibility of what's happening, and how much are they expected to create a culture where everyone is managing the succession of the person coming behind them? Because that seemed to be, from our work in best practice, that seemed to be the way that really good organisations were working, where every layer in the organisation was looking at the succession planning for the person coming behind. And we did have a little bit more debate as to how widely things were shared when it came to organisations who had programs for high-performing employees, for example. Did the people on those high-performing organisation charts know they were there? If people expect them to max out at certain levels, was that information shared with them? The transparency and visibility, and a lot of that feeds back into the corporate culture that you're dealing with too, David. So from the best practice things, we would have widespread acceptance that there's a challenge there.
Yeah. How
much of that does the regulator have visibility of, and how much direction would you expect to be given in that area?
Well, the regulator doesn't have the regulator needs to understand how the code is working in delivering effective succession planning. And the difficult one of the many difficulties with succession planning is that you have to have refreshment on the board so that the board composition is right in delivering the strategy, and you have to have continuity. And I think those two things are alongside one another are quite difficult to achieve. So I'm not saying that this is easy. And I think on the back of now every year we in the FRC we take a review of reporting on corporate governance under the code. We took a light touch approach this year because we are consulting on the code, and some of the findings of our annual review we included in the consultation document. But generally speaking, we produce a full report every year on what we consider to be good practice in terms of reporting on the code. And one of the things I think we need to do, sorry to more directly answer your question, in the future is have a look thematically at the issue of succession planning. We did produce a feedback statement, but that was at least two years ago now. And some of that work has found its way through into the code. And I think in the future we need to take a thematic review on succession planning and look at quality reporting, particularly in relation to the new code, so that we can have a better knowledge of exactly what's going on.
And one of the other issues that as you say that I'm remembering that we discussed on the way through the task force was the whole issue of the culture you create for people in organisations. Because I know that's something that's a particular area of interest for you, all the way through the organisation. What is it that we're trying to do, and with good corporate governance, what is it we're expecting of the people in our workforce, and what are we expecting that we're delivering for them?
Culture's a difficult area. People say there's no such thing as corporate culture, it's a figment of business journalists' fevered imagination. I think that if we go back to what David was just talking about, if the code and the regulator can encourage certain types of behaviour, put in certain guidelines and so on for the board of directors, the board of directors themselves then become custodians of the code and good practice, and it's up to them to then pass that down the line. And in that way, do you create a culture? I don't know. You certainly create a set of approved behaviours where succession planning and development of people is seen as being very important, more important than other things that may otherwise take their time. So I think you can certainly encourage behaviours that way through that cascading system. It has to start at the top. It has to start with governments and regulators in order to encourage people at the top of the organisation to just take their eye off the balance sheet for a moment and think about these issues. What you can't do is police the behaviour all the way down the organisation. People have to learn it for themselves, they have to want to do it, they have to see it as good business to do it. No amount of codes or best practices and guidelines are going to force them to do something that they don't want to do, especially in larger organisations where it's very difficult.
And taking it up a level into the sort of business community that we're all part of, you've, again, I know got a particular focus on personal attributes of people who are directors, are people who are, do you have to be a director before you be a non-exec director, or the attributes that you need to fulfill a big job, the same attributes that you need to do in a non-exec job? Well,
there's a huge amount of information around this, but the biggest challenge for anyone is becoming a non-executive director for the first time, and that's the biggest challenge to a board, is allowing someone to be a non-executive director for the first time on their board. They don't want to be the training ground. The way through that, or out of that circle, is to say, well, okay, what are the skills that are required to make a non-executive director effective? And I mean, I'm sure you will know this, but it's almost the opposite of the executive skills. In some ways, it's coaching, it's listening, it's encouraging, it's guiding. It's certainly not telling. It's those kind of skills. And so, if you're an executive who aspires to be a board director, then maybe it's time to start practicing some of those skills rather than the ones you are more used to using. Yeah, I'm sure there's some wonderful executive directors out there who are coaches and mentors and lovely and warm and cuddly, but my experience is that they're in the minority.
And yet we would hear that, again, from the sort of best practice discussions that we've had, that when we want to increase the pool of people available and so forth, and we want to train our people in our big executive jobs to know how to handle non-exec directors, to be a non-exec director themselves. Some of our biggest companies are encouraged to release members of their staff for see part of their succession planning as serving as a non-exec on someone else's board.
Some companies are really good at it, some companies are terrible at it, and it has nothing to do with size. So there are certain companies I could mention who are among the world's largest corporations who specifically prohibit any executive from serving on the board of another company. Regardless of whether, obviously you couldn't serve on the board of a competitor, but even if that company was completely unrelated. There are several in that camp, but there are just as many who do encourage that, and that is obviously a fantastic way of people getting a foot in the door. But there are other ways too. What I think is great about a little commercial for nedonboard here now is that there's now an organisation which I think spends an awful lot of time training people in the kind of skills or how to apply the skills that they need in order to become a non-executive director. IoT did that to a certain extent, but I think this organisation probably does it better and more generic, to be honest. Previously, I would have a lot of when I was at Hydrogen Struggles as a partner, a lot of people would come to me and say, how do I do it? I have no idea how to become a non-executive director. And we would take them through what I just said in terms of the skills they need to acquire. And I would say, go and run your local scout troop, join your NHS board if you can stand it for at least a few months. Get some experience of not being in charge, but being responsible for a while. And see if you like it.
I think this whole, David and I were having a little bit of a debate before the start of the session with this whole idea of being responsible but not being in power. And I think again in terms of the whole issue around how we train people in that environment and who's accountable when things like Carillion and PHS happen. Is fascinating. Are you getting any mood music, David, that you could share with us in terms of being up to date on? Were you listening to the news today? Did you hear what it?
Yes, my CEO Stephen Hadrell was before the two select committees this morning, and they gave him a pretty hard time. I think he did pretty well in the circumstances. I hope I don't get such a hard time. I'll say a couple of things. We have a unitary board system in the UK, and there is collective responsibility. And I can talk about the law, and we understand the law. The directors have certain duties, and the duties are owed to the company. I mean, when things get tough, clearly, a court will decide where a director's duties and responsibilities lay in a particular situation. But what we try to do in the code, and you can there's much that can be written about all this. What we try to do in the code is include a principle now that sets out, I agree, at a superficial level what an independent non-executive is there for. And that is, there are three things effectively. There is strategic guidance. So that infers experience. Specialist advice to thinking about the sector that the company is in. Could be other specialist guidance that the company requires. And holding management to account. That's a bit general, but effectively that's the monitoring role, that's the policing role. People think about it in terms of audit committee, but it doesn't just mean audit committee. So those are the three areas. And prior to that, we say provide constructive challenge, and I think that constructive challenge applies across all of those three areas. But clearly I can't do justice in a code principle to what all of that entails. And that is in the context, as I said, of the unitary board. So if, in terms of the non-executives and the independent non-executives on the board, all of that is happening. And you have the right succession plan in place. All of that is happening so that the strategy for the company for the long term is being delivered. And if you have a succession plan in place that is helping the throughput on the board so that takes place, then you're in the right place. One final point, I suppose it's slightly easy for me to say this, is that Sir Wyn Bischoff, our chair, is quite strong on just tracking back to diversity on this, diversity in the round. And he is quite willing, he told me, to take a risk on people. I need an additional person on the board. I've got a gap that needs filling. I need someone with specific expertise, but I need someone who's demonstrating the aptitude to be strategic as well, and is demonstrating those qualities. Now I suppose it's easy for him to say after 35 years or whatever on boards that he's willing to take a risk, but I think we need people who are going to set examples on this kind of thing. So I think that's that's an important approach.
Yeah, I'd also like to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which has been debated about parliamentary select committees and so forth, and just share my own experience, and that's the whole issue of workers on boards. I, in my youth, one of the non-executive positions I was very lucky to have very early on was on the board of the country's largest employee-owned manufacturing business. So one of the country's largest paper mills owned by its employees. And I have to say, as a young non-exec director, probably in my early 30s, the quality of the questioning that came from the workers to the board, I have not seen equalled since. And I have been on many big boards. And I think I have a certain sympathy when we talk about diversity and so forth, that we're not actually, that diversity includes some of that younger people. When I was on the board of ICAS, it was very clear that we should have young members on our council, members who sat down with the more senior people in our profession, the Lord Smith, some others, and chaps and girls who were in their 20s. Because if we were surveying a whole community, we needed to see the left side long ago what it was to be 24 in these organisations. So I think that whole diversity showed, I'm interested to hear more about how the scope of that discussion and the best practice in those discussions. We had a little bit of a chat around when we were doing the task force, but your experience with the regulators, do the regulators find a way of encouraging diversity of view when it comes to setting regulations within the organisation without being too much on the spot?
No, we're currently going through from our own point of view, I can answer for the FRC, and I can also attempt to answer in terms of what we're doing on the code. From our own point of view, we're having a governance review, and we're looking at the board, and we're looking at the minute we have executive, more than usual, I would say, executive representation on our board, but we're looking to diversify that, and we have our own governance review, so that's quite interesting what's going on now. We're recruiting. We also have set up in order to demonstrate that we practice what we preach, a stakeholder advisory panel. And that's not just for governance and for stewardship, that's across the whole range of our activities, whether it's narrative reporting standards, accountancy, audit quality, and actuarial. It includes a trade union congress, the TUC, private equity, environmental groups, and a very wide range of opinion.
Good to hear.
So we're
Sounds like
attempting.
best practice.
Well, we try. We try. In terms of the code, we're consulting on the 3 methods suggested by the government, which are either to have a worker director, or to have some form of workforce advisory panel, formal workforce advisory panel of some kind, or to have an independent non-executive director who, in a sense, represents the views of the workforce. We're consulting on, we're using the phrase, we use the word normally, so we would say that we're suggesting that those 3 are best practice options. We're not saying that companies are restricted to using those options, and indeed you can see how a formal workforce advisory panel and an independent non-executive might work together, might go together. I'm interested to see how many companies actually elect the worker on board option. We have, I think, 3 examples already in the UK, I think in the premium listed sector where that takes place, so I'm interested in that. But inevitably we're interested in the process and the practice of what takes place, but the focus of the code across the board, the new code, is okay, process and practices, because you need to say, well, why did we do this? But we also need to know what the outcome is. So how did it affect the board's decision making, and what was the outcome? That's what we're more interested in.
And certainly from my own experience, I certainly find it a fantastic experience having people who knew what it, because I know one of these topics that you deal with is tenure on boards, and I know you've had a little bit of a run around, and maybe we'll finish off on that question, but before we do, I think if you take restricted tenure of independents on boards, you take very short term for the CEOs in many organisations, to have a worker involvement for people who've been in a business for a long time and they've seen all the fads come and go. I certainly found it incredibly useful as a non-exec to have that on board. So do you want to come on to the tenure stuff, and then we're going to start off for Q&A, so you get your questions ready, folks.
Let's deal with what's commonly known as the 9-year rule, which I very hastily point out is not a rule, but let's deal with that. Let's start. There's nothing about tenure for executive directors in the code, not in the current code or in the proposed code, and we considered it and we ruled it out. 9 years is one of the criteria set down in the current code, which you should be taking into account when considering whether a director is independent or not. It's not the only thing. There are a number of other issues, and they're normally linked to conflicts of interest. We all know, because we all use this phrase, that independence is a state of mind. I'm not about to attempt to write down what the state of mind should be in the code. That would be difficult. We wondered. We had a good debate in the 9 months leading up to the preparation of code, including, I have to say, our own FRC board, about the nature of independence, particularly when it comes to the chair. And I have to say that it was a grand discussion. And there were some, the code, as you will know, says that, the current code says that the chair should be considered independent upon appointments. Thereafter, it's silent as to what the chair is, because we know that the chair is special. We had a number of comments saying that that should remain the case, but equally we had a number of other comments which are effectively coming from the corner of, I find it quite alarming that you wouldn't think that the chair would be considered independent. Clearly there's the chair's role in running the board and the strategy and constructive challenging discussion, but also there's a relationship with the CEO now and the representation of the company. Now, surely that means you need to have a heightened view of what independence is. In the end, we decided to put the proposition that the chair should be considered independent for the chair's tenure, and that tenure, one of the criteria for independence should be 9 years. So in a sense, we've strengthened that rule, but we're also saying that the board should be majority independent, and and that would of course include the chair. So we're consulting on that proposition, and I have to say we have had a mixed response, but it's quite interesting. The number of investors you talk to who are intensely relaxed about how long people have been on boards, particularly even if you consider them independent, and those who think that board refreshment and effective succession planning is not taking place, and there needs to be extra grit in the system to make sure it takes place. And they regard that these new provisions as dealing with that, and there's not a great deal of consensus. I think there's consensus that something needs to move, but whether this is one of the right answers or not, we're not sure yet.
Yeah, no, I think it's very helpful because it just gives an indication of where we got to in the task force on a number of issues. Really good, healthy debate, different views, and that will be published in the next few weeks and for your website or so.